If you're using a looper pedal to practice guitar, there are 3 things that I see students do wrong all the time, and it's really preventing them from being able to use this incredible tool to improve their guitar playing because it is really useful. Here are those 3 things. The first thing is you've got to play your initial loop at a very consistent tempo, as much as you possibly can, because what can happen is if you speed up by the end of the loop as it resets again, you'll hear it fall back to that slower tempo, gradually get high again, and then very suddenly fall back to the slower tempo that you started with. It's very awkward. You've probably heard yourself do that before if you've ever tried using a looper. Now, here's a great solution. If you've got just a simple loop pedal like I've got here, you can just use a metronome, and you could have it on. It's an external metronome, so you're not hearing it through your amplifier or anything. You just hear it in the room, or you could just even use the visual function and just stare at the lights flashing at you. I've got this old phone that I've had for years, and I don't use it anymore, except as a metronome with this app. So for this first loop, let's try something a little neo-soul. So the first thing I do is I just look at that metronome, or if I'm listening to it, I could hear it, and just getting the groove. Before I even hit the loop button, I want to play the groove and get into that tempo so that I can feel it more naturally. I might even play it twice around before I'm ready to hit that. That sounds pretty good. I can hear that when it loops around, the tempo is the same or very close. I can barely tell. It's really hard to get it precise, only just because maybe my foot isn't as good at hitting buttons as my hands are at playing strings. Let me show you what it sounds like if I really hurry up through that sequence and then it resets at a slower tempo. You'll probably know the sound of this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me do an extreme example, just so you can really hear what I mean. Now it's suddenly really slow again, right? And you go, wait a second, okay. You go, okay, maybe that's okay. That's okay. And you might be soloing along. Now it comes near the end of the loop, but all of a sudden, whoa, what happened to the band? They all slowed down, right? And that's not going to be great for practicing, because one of the things that we can get good at with loopers is making sure that we're practicing things in time. It's like using a jam track in a sense that if we're practicing something without any external rhythmic reference, we kind of can get into the habit of just stretching things longer, making some things faster, some things slower. And that's okay if we're just getting the notes down, but eventually, like, music is in time, right? Music has a tempo, so we need to practice playing at different tempos. But also, the other error that I see so many students make, a lot of times students will come here and they'll say, Blue, you gotta show me how to use this loop pedal. I just bought this thing, and for some reason, I just can't seem to get it to work right. And one of the biggest errors that students make is they're not clicking out at the end of their passage on the right beat. So what do I mean by that? We actually are supposed to click beat 1 to start. Yeah, that makes sense. But then we gotta click beat 1 to exit as well. And a lot of students click beat 4. And then what happens is you're actually missing a whole beat at the end of your loop, and it sounds really weird, and they can't figure it out, and they go, why does it sound like it's jumping forward at the end? So, for example, that would sound like this. Let me use a different, I'll use a different chord progression. 1, 2, 3, 4. sounds okay. You're like, yeah, it sounds fine. Oh, wait, what happened? That's not right. You can tell that's not right. Try to solo over that. It'd be like impossible to solo over that, right? It's like a weird jump. It's like the record skipped. It doesn't work. So remember, you've got to punch in on beat 1, and you got to punch in on beat 1 again at the other side of the loop. So without even using a metronome, that would be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go, that works. You'll notice that I punch out on beat 1 again. So it's not the end of your phrase that you're playing, it's the beginning of the phrase again that you punch out of. Okay, here's my third tip. It's really important that you put any pedals that are going to change your sound before the looper and not after. And here's why I suggest that. Because this way you can lay down your loop with a nice clean guitar tone or whatever you want, and then afterwards, when you want to solo over top and practice, you can hit the overdrive or whatever it is you want to sound louder, bigger, so that your lead tone is louder, bigger over top of the loop. Think of it as that's the way it would be in a band, right? The rhythm guitar, depending on the genre, but the rhythm guitar might have less distortion and the lead guitar might have more and would definitely be louder at that moment. So if we go back to our original Neo Soul loop, you'll notice that I played it with a pretty clean tone. So now I can add some overdrive and then I'll be louder over top of that. Another good idea is to keep the tone of your loop fairly almost muddy, just not too bright, because you want the lead part again to sound brighter. It's going to sound more like you're mixed as a band. So for example, I'm going to go to my neck pickup here and I'm going to even roll off the tone a bit for this. Clean tone. Let's see. Now you might say that tone doesn't sound that great, but when you hear it in context, it's definitely better for practicing over top of it. So let's just try a different chord progression. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another good idea just to thicken up the loop is to add another very simple sound to it, another layer if your looper allows for this. And the layer could just be single notes along with the chords, like in this case we have an A, a G, maybe I just slide to it and make it a little more interesting. An F is the next chord. and then a G, something like that, then the loop sounds even more interesting. Now here's perhaps the most important thing about practicing with the looper, and that is that give yourself a goal. Don't get too caught up in the technology. The technology's fun, right? But the purpose really is for us to get better at guitar and have fun at the same time. If we can combine those two things, then we're really winning. So how do you do that with a looper? Give yourself a goal. What are you going to practice with this loop? So for example, on this Neo Soul one, I've got C major 7, F major 7, G7, and C. I could say to myself, okay, I'm going to practice my C major pentatonic scale, or I'm going to practice targeting the roots of those chords. Or if you're a more advanced player, if you've been following on our lessons on Patreon, you could say, I'm going to add the F note to C major pentatonic, because we know there that C major pentatonic doesn't have an F. The pentatonic means it's only 5 notes, and F is the missing one. But F is a 4 chord. We want an F in the major pentatonic scale when we're on an F chord, don't we? Because that's going to sound really good. So let's try adding that F note. If you want to learn more about all that, you can check out our Patreon. It's free for 7 days. We've got the tabs and we've got hundreds more lessons just like this. My name is Blue Morris and I teach guitar right here in Vancouver and on Patreon and on YouTube, of course. Try this video. You might like this one too.